So, today's session is brought to you by the Association of CMPs. So, this is our professional organization of certified nonprofit professionals. So, with that, one way that our association supports our membership is by offering webinars and professional development sessions like these, things that are close to your mind, close to your heart, that you want to learn and hear more about. So, these events are always free. And if you would like to help us continue to have these free webinars, feel free to donate. We will have a link posted in the chat so that you can do that if you so wish. And now to talk a little bit about our speaker who is here today to share this wonderful information. So today our speaker is Landon Warman. So he'll share insights about navigating student loans. Part of that, giving you a little bit of background about him. So Landon is a recognized thought leader. He's also a certified student loan professional. So he will be able to answer all of your questions today. He also specializes in navigating financial systems and student loans. So today you will be hearing from Landon. He'll share some great information. And like I said earlier, Landon will also open up for Q&A a little bit later. So feel free to get those questions ready. And Landon, I will hand it over to you and stop sharing my screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate the introduction. Now, is my screen showing up for everybody?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let me get my other screen up here so I can click through. Perfect. Okay, well, today, no surprise, we're going to be talking about student loan planning and all the things that are pretty much going on around the student loan world. So my name is Landon Warman, certified financial planner, certified student loan professional, based out of Kansas City, Missouri. And we really focus on working with school district and nonprofit employees pretty much throughout. Normally I say Kansas and Missouri, but at this point we have helped people as far away as Hawaii, Alaska, New York, Florida. So pretty much hitting all the areas of the country. And it is an absolute pleasure and an opportunity to have to actually serve nonprofit employees, mainly just around forgiveness. It's so fun to do this kind of work and especially this kind of planning. So today what I want to do is I want to go over our agenda for what we're going to be going over together. So taking a look at the agenda. So first thing that we're going to start off with today is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed over the summer. We're going to do an overview of all the changes that are associated with that. That was back, I believe, in June or July of 2025. So we'll go over that. We'll talk about the impacts for future student loan borrowers as well as current student loan borrowers. I'm assuming most of you are probably in that current student loan borrower group. We're going to talk about the new repayment assistance plan that was announced last summer as well. We'll talk about public service loan forgiveness and some updates on where that program stands. And then before we switch into who's most impacted, we're also going to talk about a couple other forgiveness programs just at a very high level. I'm assuming most of the people on here, public service loan forgiveness is the thing that's most pressing. And so we'll spend a decent amount of time with that. At the end, we're going to open it up to those questions that I'm sure a lot of you have. Okay. So jumping into things. Let's do that overview of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So to kind of summarize this, these were really the largest changes around student loans that we have pretty much seen probably in the last 10 years. Now, I know you as student loan borrowers are probably thinking like, what are you talking about? Every single year there's been changes. Ever since COVID, it feels like every year has been a little bit irregular when it comes to student loans, and that's absolutely been the case. Now, in terms of just sweeping changes, this was the big thing that brought a lot of changes. And to kind of emphasize how big this was, is it's really going to be affecting new and existing borrowers pretty much across the board. So pretty much all new and existing student loan borrowers in some form or fashion are going to be impacted. Almost all the repayment plans that are currently around or in place are going to be impacted. And then there's going to be large changes for those future student loan borrowers, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And the thing that I always like to say on these webinars is, even though this has already happened and maybe different payment plans are going to be removed or things are changing, there's always time to plan. And the more proactive we are around this planning, the better off that you're going to be. So just know that there might be some things during this webinar that don't sit well with you, or you're not too excited about, especially if you're a future student loan borrower, or maybe you're trying to navigate some different programs. Just know that we need to be exploring our options. And a lot of times, whenever we talk to student loan borrowers, they take a decision of saying, well, I'm just going to try to disregard this or shut down and not address this situation. That is the wrong way to go about this. We need to be taking a proactive approach. If there's planning that needs to be done, we need to look at that to make sure that we're getting you in the best situation possible. So starting with those future borrowers, in terms of how they were kind of impacted around the One Big Beautiful Bill. So let's talk about repayment plans and what that's going to look like for borrowers. And when I say future student loan borrowers, this is pretty much anybody that's going to be borrowing federal student loans after July 1st of 2026. So for these borrowers, just know that there's going to be a much more limited options in terms of how you can repay those student loans. So if you take out loans after July 1st, 2026, the only income-driven repayment plan that's going to be available to you is the repayment assistance plan. This is super important for all of my public service people on here and nonprofit employees, mainly just because if you're pursuing forgiveness, this is going to be the plan that you're going to want to be on. And if you're on a different one and take out loans, you are going to be forced onto that repayment assistance plan. So just know this is going to be the one option in terms of making payments on an income-driven repayment plan if you take out loans after July 1st, 2026. Now, another really, really important thing is that if you're a parent borrower that has taken out Parent Plus loans, there's things that you're going to have to do. And there's deadlines that are quickly approaching, like pretty much next week. But if you take out a Parent Plus loan after July 1st, 2026, you are no longer going to be eligible for making payments on an income-driven repayment plan. Now, the reason why this is so impactful and important for everybody on here is, let's say that you take out student loans for one of your children and you're in the situation where you're like, well, this is going to be great. I'm a public service employee. These Parent Plus loans are technically in my name. Well, I'm going to be able to get forgiveness on these. The issue is the only way that you can go for public service loan forgiveness is by making payments on an income-driven repayment plan. And if you can't get your Parent Plus loans to qualify for an income-driven repayment plan, you're not going to be able to get forgiveness. So kind of emphasizing Parent Plus borrowers a little bit more. One thing that they did come out and say recently, and this was earlier in the year, is that if you do have Parent Plus loans and are wanting to qualify for an income-driven repayment plan, they are advising people to consolidate those loans by April 1st. So pretty much like next week. And the reason they're saying that is because your Parent Plus loan, when you consolidate it, it needs to be fully dispersed and your new loan needs to be created by July 1st, 2026. If it's not created by then, you are going to lose that option to be on an income-driven repayment plan for those Parent Plus loans that you consolidated. So a super important key thing to remember there. And then on the other side of the repayment plan spectrum, typically in the past, there's been the standard repayment plan, the extended, the graduated repayment plan, extended graduated repayment plan, which is kind of a mixture of those. Moving forward, new borrowers are just going to have that standard repayment plan. And they did make some adjustments to the standard repayment plan, which I'll show on my next screen. But just know that moving forward, future borrowers are pretty much going to have two repayment options: the new standard repayment plan and the repayment assistance plan. That applies for borrowers that have current student loans. If you take out a new additional loan after July 1st, 2026, it will force you to only make payments either on one of these two options. So super important to remember if you, one, haven't taken out any loans and are planning to, or are needing to take out one or two extra loans, maybe for a master's program, a specialist degree, a PhD, anything along those lines that will impact you. Now, looking at that new standard repayment plan that is going to be available, here's kind of how it breaks down. Now, historically, the standard repayment plan, it's been 10 years of the same payment amount every single month. Once you get to that 10-year mark, it's typically forgiven, or not forgiven, sorry, paid off. So once you get to the end of that term, 10 years worth of payments, It's just completely paid off. Now, depending on your balance moving forward, that might change what your repayment term is. So for example, if your balance is between 25 and 50,000, well, you might have 15 years to be able to pay those loans off on the standard repayment plan. But just know that like we'll have this option, but those other flexibilities that we had, like the graduated repayment, the extended repayment, for a lot of borrowers, those are not going to be available for if you're a new borrower. Now, in terms of loan limits, so this is a really important slide, especially if you have kids that are going to be going to school, or if you are still in school or are needing to take out additional loans. Loan limits have changed substantially. Now, the undergraduate loan limit is staying exactly the same. So over a 4-year period, a dependent student can take out a total of 27,000 for that 4-year period. A little bit is broken up each semester. Now, a lot of you on here are probably thinking like, oh, I exactly remember this. I remember being able to get the little bit of direct unsubsidized and subsidized student loans when I was in my undergraduate degree. This is what I'm talking about. So there was no changes to that. We know these limits are small. They typically don't cover the full cost of college. And so right there, we know that people are typically looking at other solutions to fund college if it's not through grants or scholarships. Now, moving past undergraduate into more of like your graduate degrees. So the Grad Plus program was completely eliminated. Now, the Grad Plus program, the way it worked is it pretty much allowed you to borrow up to the full cost of attendance for whatever your program cost. So let's say that you're going to school and your program costs $35,000 a year. You'd be able to take out $35,000 a year for that Grad Plus or for a Grad Plus loan. That program is completely eliminated. Now, that doesn't mean that graduate borrowers are completely out in terms of how they can pay for this kind of education. But the way it's going to work is graduate students are going to be capped at $20,500 per year. And there's a total $100,000 cap with that. And so, along with that, the other big change would be around professional students. So professional students, and when I say professional students, think of those professional degrees, doctors, dentists, lawyers. Those are going to be those individuals that fall into like a professional degree program, typically coming with a larger cost. More of your graduate students think of like master's degrees. So for professional students, they're going to be capped at $50,000 per year, or in a $200,000 cap over the total amount of time that they're going to be in school. Now, the reason why that this is going to be so detrimental to future borrowers is that a lot of you on here probably went through a program like a grad program where it cost much more than $20,500 per year. Along with that, think of professional students, $50,000 per year to get a doctor through school. I mean, that's a lot. You know, I'm based here in Kansas City, and I know one of our big professional programs is like UMKC Dental. They're charging $300,000 to $400,000 for their whole program. So when you think of how large these, and I think it's probably closer to 300 if I remember correctly, but when you think of how much loans that these kids are going to have to take out, and the fact that they're only going to have $50,000 a year, there's going to be a college funding gap that's going to need to be addressed. Now, we're going to talk about how that gap is typically addressed in the next slide. But just know, for a student loan borrower, the total cumulative cap, which this was not around originally, the total amount that a borrower can take out over their lifetime is $257,500. Now, if you're already enrolled in a program, you can continue under the old loan rules for the lesser of 3 years or the length of your program. So for example, if you're going to a 4-year program and you're already enrolled, you at least have 3 years under those old rules. Now, in terms of talking about this college funding gap, you know, we know that the undergraduate limits are not enough in most cases. We know now that since Grad Plus is gone, that there's going to be a gap there for most grad or professional students, or some grad, a lot of professional students. A lot of student loan borrowers would result to looking at Parent Plus loans. So Parent Plus loans, they originally were, these borrowers were allowed to pretty much take out as much as they needed to fill that gap. Now, you do have to be eligible to take this, and typically you have to go through a credit check, and you have to have good credit as a parent. But once you pass that credit check, you'd be able to borrow whatever the student needs to fulfill the rest of their loan needs. There are going to be changes to the Parent Plus loan limits as well. So if I had to kind of summarize, the biggest impacts here, it's definitely going to be around parent borrowers and grad and professional students. But parent borrowers, the maximum you're going to be allowed to borrow per child is $20,000 per year, and a total $65,000 lifetime cap per child. I have a lot of student loan borrowers that are paying or borrowing much more than that right now. So this is another adjustment. So let's kind of think of this a little bit more holistically. So let's just say that we're going through an undergraduate degree. We know those loan limits aren't going to be enough. Maybe we take out the total amount of Parent Plus loans at the 20,000, and then we're still left with some funding that we're going to have to come up with. Well, if you're not getting it through grants or scholarships, the main area that most student loan borrowers are going to have to look at will be private loans. And so just be very cautious now when it comes to future college funding, that we need to be much more proactive with this kind of planning than we have ever been in the past. Because what will happen is students are going to get to college without doing this planning, assuming they can take out whatever they need for loans, and that's just not going to be the case moving forward. So just kind of keep this in mind whenever you're thinking maybe you have a student that's about to go to school, or someone, a young child that you're needing to plan for. We need to be looking at doing proactive saving so that we can afford the cost of college. Okay, we'll take a deep breath there. Let's talk about current student loan borrowers. Now, for current student loan borrowers, these individuals I'm referring to are the people that are not going to be taking out a single additional loan past July 1st, 2026. So you've done your education, you don't need to go back, you're not going to be taking any more loans out for yourself or for a child as a Parent Plus loan. Here's how things are going to look for you. So you're going to have 3 total repayment options. You're going to, on the income-driven repayment plan side, you're going to have the income-based repayment that's going to be available. Now, that income-based repayment, it could be the old income-based repayment or the new income-based repayment. Depending on when you took your loans out, might dictate which of those plans you're going to go on. Outside of that, the other one, of course, will be the repayment assistance plan, which the repayment assistance plan isn't out yet. Allegedly, it's going to come out July 1st, 2026. So in terms of income-driven repayment plans, you'll have the income-based repayment and the repayment assistance plan. On the other side of the repayment universe, in terms of regular repayments, you'll just have that standard repayment plan that will be available. And just another note for those parent borrowers, make sure that you are taking action as fast as possible if you think consolidating is going to be beneficial for you. Typically, we won't recommend that all Parent Plus loan borrowers consolidate, just because those are one-off recommendations that we make. But if you have the time to do the research on your own, definitely look at this, especially if you're trying to repay your loans under an income-driven repayment plan, because it's going to impact a lot of you. And then, like I said, the standard repayment plan that will be available, but pretty much outside of this, all those other repayment plans are going to be eliminated. And so actually taking a more broader look of where things are at and what's getting eliminated. So you have the current way things are set up. You have that standard repayment plan, graduated, extended. So the graduated and extended will be eliminated. And then with those income-driven repayment plans, we have income contingent, income base, pay as you earn, the save plan, which I know probably a lot of borrowers are on currently. Most of those are going to get eliminated except for that income-based repayment. Then that repayment assistance plan will get added in. Now, probably at this point, a lot of you are thinking like, oh my gosh, my payments are going to skyrocket. Should I be worried? What do I need to do? Do I need to switch plans? Let's actually talk about the repayment assistance plan, because I don't want everybody to freak out on here. The thing that I will start off by saying is the repayment assistance plan is much better than what most people were thinking. I would say that whenever this first came out, or right before it came out, it was not looking good. And a lot of student loan planners and borrowers were very worried. There's a lot of advocate groups that were trying to get things to be a little bit more beneficial for borrowers. It's really not that bad once we finally got the final terms of it. And so the way payments are going to be calculated under the repayment assistance plan, it's going to be based off of your adjusted gross income. And I'll show you kind of how that works here on this next slide. But if you don't know what your adjusted gross income is, get your tax return, whatever your most recent one is, look at the line 11. That is going to be your adjusted gross income. You can take that number and then use it on the next slide that I'm going to show with all of you. Now, how they are giving you benefits towards how many children you have changes a little bit. Normally in the past, it would be linked to the federal poverty level, where if you, depending on your household size, you could get a discount on your payment. Now it's going to be a little bit simpler in terms of calculating that. It's just if you have one child, it's a $50 per month deduction in student loan payments. If it's two children, it's a $100 per month deduction in student loan payments. What we're typically seeing is the larger your family size, the less beneficial the repayment assistance plan is actually looking to be. So it's a little bit more of a negative impact on larger student loan or larger families that have student loans. Now, a wonderful thing with this plan is the fact that the government, if you have unpaid interest, they're going to be completely subsidizing that cost. So maybe you're not going for forgiveness, but you're going through a period of time where your income's pretty low and you can't make a whole lot of payments. Well, you are required to make a minimum $10 per month payment, but let's say that you have an extra $500 per month in accruing interest. They're actually going to completely subsidize that cost. So you're not going to have these balances like we've seen in the past where it's accumulating and accumulating, and we have these runaway student loan balances. Under the repayment assistance plan, the subsidy is going to be a wonderful thing for all of you. And then from more of like a student loan planning perspective, this is a extremely important one for us. They are going to allow you to continue to do married filings separate and exclude your spouse's income from your payment calculation. Now, I know a lot of you are like, wow, I didn't know about that. Tell me like a little bit more. We only make those recommendations when we're meeting with borrowers one-on-one, because like you could imagine, when you change things with your taxes, it can impact so many different things. Not only will it impact your student loans, it'll impact your retirement contributions, your dependent deductions, different credits, your insurance benefits. And so just know that that is a strategy we often talk about with student loan borrowers, but you have to be very, very careful to make sure it's right for you, because there are some negative impacts that could happen around making a recommendation like that. Now, if you're in a situation where you aren't going to be going for something like public service loan forgiveness, where it's typically based off of 10 years worth of payments, maybe you're in a situation where you're about to head into retirement and you're like, well, I'm not going to get this public service forgiveness. They do have a max repayment term on this plan. So if you pay for a total 30 years, any balance that you do have left over at the end of that 30-year period, it also does get forgiven. Now, a lot of you are probably not too concerned about that. Most of you are going to be public service employees. Okay, so I told you that if you're looking at your tax return and you see what your adjusted gross income is off that line 11, this is how you're actually going to be able to calculate out your student loan payment. And so I've got my calculator out and I'm going to run through an example with you. So let's just say that you look at your tax return and your line 11, let's just say that it shows $57,000. Well, the way they're going to look at that is they're going to say, okay, well, you would fall in the range of 50,000 to 59,999, and we're going to take 5% of your adjusted gross income. So 57,000 times 5%, that gets us $2,850, which is our annual student loan amount. We divide that by 12. Your payments would be about $237.50 per month. So they've pretty much created this sliding scale of the larger your income goes up, your payments, of course, are going to go up based on a different percentage of your adjusted gross income. Now, the real question is, well, how does this stack up against, the other repayment plans that are currently available? Well, let's take a look at that. So in terms of how they all stack up, I would say the interest subsidy is going to be the best on the repayment assistance plan compared to the old and new income-based repayment. All of these plans are going to allow for married filing separate. If you are a borrower that can't get public service loan forgiveness, it is a little bit more negative for you on this side of things. That max repayment term is 30 years versus 25 or 20 with other plans. But overall, it's really not that bad of a repayment plan. It does have different benefits, but not all of those benefits are negative or positive. So when you kind of look at what those payments could hypothetically be, you can kind of get an idea of, when I was saying the bigger your family gets, the less of a benefit you get the the repayment assistance plan. And you can see that for the 185,000 of adjusted gross income with a family of 3. Okay. So transitioning just a little bit, we'll get to public service loan forgiveness next, but a little bit of a timeline. So back in August 1st, 2025, this is for all of those borrowers that are on save forbearance. Interest did start accruing on your student loans. While payments aren't technically required, you're in this save forbearance, you do have interest accruing. Now, another deadline that's not mentioned on here is that April 1st Parent Plus loan borrower deadline that they are recommending that if you're wanting to pay on an income-driven repayment plan, you're wanting to hopefully have those loans consolidated by April 1st. Moving forward to July 1st, 2026. Now, I will say this just kind of with caution. You know how our government works. It doesn't work the fastest. They said the repayment assistance plan will be available on July 1st, 2026. I hope that they can stick to that date. Just know that these are all flexible dates, but as of now, they are still sticking with July 1st, 2026 as the date that the repayment assistance plan will be available for borrowers to start moving on to. And then this is also the deadline where you need to make sure those loans are consolidated and fully dispersed if you have those Parent Plus loans. And then this is when you're slowly going to start being transitioned off the old legacy plans. So the income contingent, pay as you earn, repay as you earn, save. Between July 1st, 2026 and 2028, they're going to slowly transition you onto the income-based or the repayment assistance plan. So let's say you were a borrower that was wanting to go for public service loan forgiveness. Here's kind of what I would be thinking about right now, because a lot of you are probably on that save forbearance. A lot of times you should be looking at potentially making a transition to get onto the income-based repayment plan right now, and then evaluating your options for when the repayment assistance plan comes out this summer. When that plan comes out this summer, you need to make a decision on, will your payments be lower on the income-based repayment, or will they be lower on the repayment assistance plan? Because ultimately you'll want to go with the option that has the lowest payment for you and your family. Okay, so let's go over public service loan forgiveness. We'll talk about some updates. So to kind of just start with the basics of public service loan forgiveness, pretty much the way it works is that you can get a forgiveness of your total student loan balance after you make 120 qualified payments. And the best part about this is that it is completely tax-free forgiveness. You do not have to pay any kinds of income tax on this. We had a student loan borrower in Kansas where, they had about 300,000 in loans that got forgiven, not a single tax liability that they have to pay. Now, when I say qualified payments, what does that actually mean? Well, qualified payments typically means that you have to have the correct type of loan to start, which we'll talk about, but you really need to make sure that you're making a qualified payment, which really just means you have to be on the right repayment plan. And the correct repayment plan would be those income-driven repayment plans, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then you have to have qualified employment. In terms of who qualifies for public service loan forgiveness from an employment standpoint, it's going to be anybody that's at the state, federal, or local levels of our government. You can also think about any kinds of 501c3 nonprofits. All of those employers are going to count. And then you have to at least be working 30 hours per week. The definition used to be a little bit different there, but they did change that. So it's much easier, much more straightforward. So as long as you're working 30 hours per week, you would be classified as full-time, regardless of what your employment or your employer classifies you as. Now, in terms of like the eligible versus ineligible loans, so the only loans that are going to be eligible will be direct loans. So log into studentaid.gov, log into your loan servicer. When you go on there, make sure that they say direct Stafford, subsidized loan, unsubsidized loan. It might say direct consolidation loan. You need to make sure that those loans do not say federal family education loans or FFEL, parent plus loans. These loans are not going to qualify for forgiveness. So if you have these types of loans, you need to be probably taking some action if you want to get forgiveness. So FFEL loans, those will not qualify for forgiveness. Those can be consolidated. Parent plus loans don't qualify. Those can also be consolidated. Private loans can never qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So just know you need to tread very cautiously when it comes to taking out private loans. One, because they're not going to have all the nice federal benefits that federal student loans can have, such as deferments and forbearances. But also you'll never be able to transition those to federal loans. So just know that when you take out those loans, you have a lot more restriction, and you're not going to have as much benefit as the federal student loan system provides. And then Perkins loans do not qualify for forgiveness as well. Like I said, most of these loans can be consolidated to get them to qualify, though. And then historically, here is kind of the plans that would be eligible for forgiveness in terms of making payments. It was the income contingent, the income based, pay as you earn, the save plan. Just know moving forward for those existing student loan borrowers, it's just going to be the repayment assistance plan as well as the income based repayment. If you take out loans after July 1st, you'll only have the repayment assistance plan available to you. And talking about some other updates. The lawsuits, I would say, around public service loan forgiveness have slowed down a little bit. Um, there was there was a little bit of targeting when it came around public service loan forgiveness, and it's not something you definitely want to see, just because you have to think of like the reason people are going into public service, and it's mainly not you don't often go into public service to make a big six-figure income. It's going in because you have the heart, and it's something that you're very passionate and want to do, and it's a line of work that you are extremely excited about. And so what happened was earlier, probably last year, the Trump administration unfortunately started looking at ways to kind of restrict public service loan forgiveness for organizations that were not adhering to their agenda. So think of things like anything that might be related to immigration, anything around like sex change surgeries. Those are kind of those areas where if it wasn't going with his agenda, there was a little comments about how that they could potentially disqualify them for being eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Just know if that happens, there are going to be lawsuits. There is going to be a whole thing about that. So, as a whole, for public service loan forgiveness, it's still a phenomenal program. I don't expect it to go anywhere. We get these questions all the time. Do you think it's going to be around in 10 years? I do. Um, can you imagine if they got rid of a loan forgiveness program that all of their federal workers were on? It would get a lot of backlash. Now, one thing with public service loan forgiveness, there is massive backlogs with applying for income-driven repayment plans, for applying for employment certifications for public service loan forgiveness, for the PSLF buyback. There is very large backlogs. They're trying to get through it, but I don't expect them to get caught up anytime soon. And all that to say, be very patient whenever you're trying to pursue this program. It does work. We just had another new borrower get their loans forgiven in January, and they got the forgiveness January 2026. They submitted their forms January 2025. So, like I said, it is a backlog. It's slow, but people still are getting their loans forgiven. And another exciting thing is, probably 2 to 3 years ago, there was this thing called the PSLF buyback that got announced, and borrowers are still figuring out about that. And it's been a wonderful program, and it does work. Like I said, just takes some time. The way the PSLF buyback works is it allows the Department of Education to pretty much review your record and say, are there periods of time where you were not in repayment that we could allow you to buy back as a lump sum? So an easy example is pretty much from, today back till August, all of you that have been on the Save Forbearance, you are eligible to submit a PSLF buyback to get credit for all those months that you weren't making payments. Now, the one thing that I want you to all remember is that you cannot submit a PSLF buyback until you reach your 120 months of qualified employment. Once you hit that, and if you were to receive a buyback, you would have to be immediately eligible for forgiveness. So don't run off this session trying to submit a buyback if you're only been with your employer for 7 or 8 years. You have to get past that 10-year or that 120-month mark where you would be immediately eligible if you received the buyback request. Okay, now I don't have a big slide on this, but there are other forgiveness opportunities, and I want to kind of address this mostly just because some borrowers on here might not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. The other two forgiveness programs that we do the most work around would be teacher loan forgiveness. So if we have any kinds of school teachers in here that are teaching at a low income school, then you can qualify for either 5,000 in forgiveness or 17,500 in forgiveness. The teachers that will qualify for 17,500 will be the ones that are teaching special education or teaching math or science at the secondary level. So that could be the 17.5 for you. If you're teaching and you're just, let's just say, a general classroom teacher, it would most likely be that $5,000. You do have to be providing direct classroom support, and you have to work consecutively at a low-income school for 5 years. If you don't know if your school is a low-income school, you can Google teacher loan forgiveness low-income directory on Google. It should take you to a link that would tell you all the information about it. The other program that I've already mentioned a little bit would be the IDR forgiveness, or what we call long-term forgiveness. This would be when you hit the maximum repayment terms for an income-driven repayment plan. So for example, the repayment assistance plan, we said it was 30 years. For income-based repayment, we said it was either 20 or 25 years. The way those programs work is we really tried to keep your income as low as possible to pretty much get the largest amount of student loan forgiveness possible. The big difference, though, is, of course, well, one, the repayment term is going to be longer. And so we need to make sure your income is low enough to get you a forgiveness on a balance that's remaining. But number two is it's actually taxable forgiveness. So let's say you get $100,000 in student loan forgiveness under that long-term forgiveness. That is going to be taxed at the federal and state level. So just know you need to be saving up for what we kind of call that tax bomb. So proactive saving over time to make sure that you have stuff to fulfill that tax obligation when it comes. But when we try to structure around keeping income low, you have to think about tax planning, retirement contributions, structuring insurance benefits. All of these things impact your student loan payment when you're trying to go for forgiveness. And if you can figure out how to structure them correctly, you can dramatically lower your student loan payment. We've had borrowers get $0 payments when they were at $500 or $700. So there is a lot of opportunity around that kind of planning. And then around who's most impacted by all of these changes, it's mostly going to be those future student loan borrowers that are going to be taking out grad or professional loans, as well as the parent borrowers. And all of that to say, just make sure you're being as proactive with your planning as possible. The last thing that we want you to do is wait till the last minute. We're up against a deadline and then we're out of options. The more time that we have to plan, the better off you're going to be whenever this inflection point of you need to make a decision around education or repayment comes around. So hopefully I did not overwhelm a lot of you on here, but just know, like, we do this for a living. So if anybody does need help, we just want to be a resource. Yeah, this is education to all of you to hopefully benefit and put you in a good position. But we understand that some of you on here will need one-on-one help. Just know that we do provide 1-hour consults for a flat fee. If anybody is interested in getting that kind of help, I do have a link to a QR code here. It'll take you right to my booking calendar. And for those individuals that are attending live today, we are going to knock $50 off those consults just to give you an extra little benefit. We're just super happy to be here, and hopefully you got a lot of benefit out of this. And with that, I just want to open it up to questions to see if we can get some one-off questions answered for all of you.
All righty. Thank you so much, Landon. We have quite a bit of questions. So hopefully we can get through a good bit of them for our audience. So for starters, we have a question that says, does the navigation look different between when you are the creator versus creator/founder of a nonprofit organization when it comes to student loan forgiveness?
Um, I would say that the main thing to kind of look at, so we have helped some founders or creators of nonprofits. We've had some people do it for the right reasons, some people do it for the wrong reasons. Just know that, like, if you are, of course, wanting to do a nonprofit, go in with it for the right intentions. We've had some borrowers that have came to us and said, hey, well, I mean, we don't qualify for forgiveness, but can we just spin up a 501c3 and get it? No, legally, you're not allowed to do it that way. So make sure that you are standing up of course, an actual nonprofit that, has a purpose and is actually doing things outside of just going for forgiveness. Outside of that, no, there's not a whole lot of difference outside of the founders or creators. You just need to make sure that when you're doing your employer certifications, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you're the one that's certifying your employment. But worst case scenario, I know there's probably going to be some people on here where it's like a single member nonprofit. It's okay as long as you can actually prove that, it's a legitimate nonprofit. You're doing what you say you're doing. So no, there's no issues with that, and there's not going to be a whole lot of differences there.
Got it. Thank you so much for that, Landon. Our next question coming up says, do you believe colleges and universities will adjust attendance costs and fees due to the new caps?
There's going to be an inflection point. What's going to happen is these borrowers that are wanting to go to, let's say, UMKC Dental, for example, the pool of students that are going to be able to afford to go there is going to shrink dramatically. And so they're going to have to make changes. Now, across the university, let's just say universe, I don't think there's going to be big changes. But what I can see happening is when it's very specific around the different programs and professional degrees, I think they're going to have to make some adjustments there. Because if they don't, their pool of students that can actually afford to go to those schools will drop dramatically. So we could even see them try to start spinning up their own funding options within the university. We could see them being a little bit more flexible with grants or scholarships, but ultimately the cost of college, the way it's going now, there's no way it can sustain itself with the balances that we have in place, or borrowers are just going to continue to be forced to go to private loans, and that's the last thing that we want.
All right. So we have a question from one of our audience members that says, I have over 13 years in nonprofits of experience, but I have had to utilize forbearance/deferment at different periods due to high payments, life, etc. But my best bet be to look into PSLF buyback. That's the part one. Part two is, does PSLF have to be 120 consecutive payments or just 120 total payments?
Yeah, so I'll address the easiest question, and it does not have to be consecutive payments. So you can have payment breaks, you can have employment breaks, but to make a qualified payment, you have to be employed at a public service employer and make a payment for that month. So you can have employment breaks, payment breaks, that's perfectly fine. Now, that other question about the individual that has been working for 15 years and has had some forbearances on that record, the first thing that I would probably recommend is you go ahead and send in an employment certification form. That's the process of saying, hey, Department of Education, I have worked for a public service employer for 15 years and I want to have that certified. Once you do that process, it will update your record to show you the current amount of payments and credits that you'll have towards public service loan forgiveness. But most importantly, it will set you up to be able to do a PSLF buyback request right after that.
Got it. Thank you. I have a little bit of a follow-up question that kind of ties along with that. This one is more so from a recent graduate who graduated in fall, and they were in their grace period for the direct loan for that semester. They would like to know, do the payments made during the deferred period count towards the qualifying payments under PSLF? Part one, and then part two, is it requested, do they need to request to get that waived before making payments? Let me
So
know if I need to repeat.
yeah, so grace periods do not count towards forgiveness. And especially if payments, if you weren't enrolled in a payment plan during that period, I mean, you wouldn't have been if you were in a grace period. So no, that period will not count towards forgiveness. And in-school deferments also can't count towards forgiveness.
Okay, let me go back up towards the top. I know we had some more recently come in, but we're doing good on time, so
Great.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Are there any updates on certain graduate programs being classified as non-professional degrees by the Department of Education, not being eligible for PSLF?
Could you repeat that one more time for me?
Yeah, are there any updates on certain graduate programs that are not being classified as non-professional degrees by the Department of Education as not being eligible for PSLF?
So I think I know where this person is trying to ask the question, but it might be just a little bit different. So when it comes to public service loan forgiveness, it's not about the degree program. So like I could go to school for architecture and would be planning to be working at a private company that wouldn't qualify for forgiveness, but I could transition into public service employer and get qualified for forgiveness. So it's not going to be about the degree programs that will qualify for forgiveness. Now, I think what this borrower might be at, or this individual might be asking, is I know there was some adjustments or changes at the Department of Education and what the administration was doing in terms of what they're going to classify as a professional and graduate program, which can change the eligibility of what loans that you can take out. So I know there was some changes there. I haven't looked into it too much further than that, but I know there was some updates around what they're considering professional programs or what should be considered and should not be considered professional programs.
Thank you for that. The other question that we have is, can you buy back months from the time you are in save?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I know that they are happy to hear that.
Yes.
Um, let's see.
Unless they come out and change the rules on us. Because I know there has been a lot of changes, but last that I have read and worked with borrowers on that you could buy back that save forbearance under the buyback request.
How do new organizations work to be qualified employers to qualify for public service loan forgiveness?
Yep. I mean, the first step is you have to have that 501(c)(3) nonprofit status. Once you have it there, I mean, the next step would be there's nothing that you need to technically report to the Department of Education. It's just a matter of a borrower going in, certifying their employment, and eventually you'll enter a tax ID number in to identify that employer, which then they, of course, can run against the IRS website to verify that it is a nonprofit or a 501(c)(3) that's in place. So nothing big or dramatic that you have to do at the Department of Education level.
Do you have to fill out the PSLF form for each year per employee? Part one. And then part two, why are this person is asking specifically why the forms they submitted over 2 years ago might still be pending. Why are they still pending? So one and two.
Yeah, so the first one is we always recommend that borrowers are certifying their employment every single year, mainly just because it allows us to stay up to date and have accurate counts for your progress towards public service loan forgiveness. Um, but when it comes to, I mean, the way employment certification forms are submitted has changed dramatically over the last few years. Most of it is an online process at this point. So technically, the way it would work is you would go into the system and you would start adding your start and end dates for all of your public service employers. So you would put those start and end dates in. You would put their tax ID numbers in, which if you don't have that, it's typically on your W-2 that you can find that, or by reaching out to the past employer. Once you put that in, they might have saved contact information for that public service employer already in the system. If that's the case, they typically get an email notification asking them to go in and review to certify that you as the employee at the time worked for that organization. And then it's a completely online process. And so that's kind of handled digitally. But yeah, you do have to certify all of your employment at least once to kind of get up to date if you haven't done it before. And then past that, you just need to update, on a year by year basis for all your new employment. Um, the 2 years waiting on that application, I mean, this is kind of that uncertainty that I'm talking about in the backlog. It absolutely could be that backlog. Best thing that you can do at this point is give them a call and just confirm that you don't need to submit another application on that. We also have been seeing some reports and when we've been doing some consults, some borrowers show that their PSLF applications are still in processing, but their payment accounts have already updated. We're not sure on why it's showing that. It sometimes it's a new thing every single day when it comes to student loans. A lot of this is you kind of learn as you go with some of these.
Thank you for that. We probably only have enough time for two more questions, and then we'll start to wrap up. So one of our questions is, if I consolidated, would my prior, before consolidation, payments count towards my 120 payments?
So this was another change that happened around public service loan forgiveness. If you had credit on those old loans, what they've come out and said is that if you consolidate, they're going to give you a weighted average of the credits that you had based on the student loan balance. So it used to be a situation where if you consolidated, all of your payments would get wiped clean, no credit moving forward. But they have said if you do consolidate your loans, you can get the weighted average of those credits. So it's not completely wiped out.
All right, thank you for that. And then, Landon, we did have one user mention that they were attempting to book the appointment, but they were having some trouble. So can you perhaps just send the link to that? If not, you can also just email it to us and we'll email it out to you all so you can have it along with the slide deck.
Yeah, I can absolutely send that to you afterwards. Whenever you go on to the booking form, there will be like 4 or 5 different options. The option that you'll want to choose is the 1 hour student loan consult. And if we see the booking come through today, you'll be eligible for that $50 discount.
All right. And following up with that as well, we had a question that asked, if they sign up for the one-on-one consult, will you help them determine how prior loans are calculated? Specifically, they'd like help determining how much credit they have towards the 20, 25, 30-year discharge.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. There's some ways that we can actually review that. There used to be this thing called like a payment tracker that was on the studentaid.gov website. It was phenomenal when they had it up. And then they said, no, there's errors with it. We're going to take it down. And then they removed it. And I was really upset about that because most of the time when it comes to pursuing that long-term forgiveness, it's a lot of manual counting of that. So the fact that they put that payment tracker up, it was awesome. There is a way that you can still review what that payment tracker was showing. There's kind of like a little backdoor way that is still, if you type in the right URL link, we can actually find that. So that is something that we would help them review is a rough estimate on how much they would have in credits towards long-term forgiveness.
That's good news. Thank you
Yeah.
for that, Landon. Those are all the questions that we have time for today. So just to wrap us up, Landon, thank you so much for sharing all of this information. I know we have several people in the audience who are super grateful and also grateful that they get to have the slide deck after this to review the information. And just again, as a reminder, everyone, we will follow up and send out the slide deck, the recording of this for you all to review essentially. So just keep an eye on your email. You should get it within the next week. Outside of that, just a reminder, this is brought to you by our Association of CMPs. We host free webinars and events throughout the year. So feel free to check out and save our upcoming events page so that you can tap into more events that we have and mark your calendar and maybe share with a friend. You are welcome to donate to help us keep these sessions free. We're so glad that you all were able to join us today. And then also, we invite you to take a brief survey, share your feedback, and you could enter for a chance to win a nice little prize. So we would love to hear from you all about how you enjoyed today's sessions, any takeaways, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So thank you for coming and have a marvelous Thursday. Thanks.